Welcome back to How China Works. This is Ying Li. Today, our special cross-cultural expert is Diego Gilardoni. Or his Chinese name is Ji Boming, who is a global business and communication expert, international public speaker, and author of Decoding China, Cross-Cultural Strategies for Successful Business with the Chinese. And he has special expertise on China and cross-cultural business and deep knowledge of international affairs. We're very honored and happy to have you here on our show. How are you doing, Diego?
I'm great, and I'm really glad to be here with you, Ying.
Wonderful.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. We love to have you here. Why don't you give us a quick intro of why and how did you embark on this journey of cultural intelligence and helping the world decode China, especially Chinese communication?
Well, I don't know if I was able to help the world decode China, but I can certainly tell you something about myself and why I embarked in this journey. Actually, this journey started very early on, because coming from a multicultural, multi-language country such as Switzerland, I really understood very early on the impact that cultural differences can have on communication and on personal relationships, and the necessity to develop cultural intelligence to re-establish more effective communication between people in a constructive way. But most importantly, what I understood, and I think that really this is something that became important for me when going to China, is that language is just one small part of culture, because we can speak in the same language coming from different cultures, but if we don't understand the cultural codes and the value of the specific culture of the person we are talking with, even if we share a common language to communicate verbally, an effective communication is difficult to achieve. And this came particularly true when I arrived in China for the first time as a business consultant, representing European companies that wanted to do business in China and that didn't have any kind of experience outside of Europe before that. And I realized very soon that most of the issues that we faced in developing their business on the Chinese market were mostly related to cultural differences. That's when I really realized that there was something to do at that level, because I would realize that most companies still didn't understand the importance of developing cultural intelligence, which actually is the core of any serious business strategies, not only in China, but for any companies doing business across different markets around the world.
Yeah, as for specifically in entering Chinese market, so you have many interesting points in your book, right? Decoding China. So you must have great examples for the European clients or European friends really deal with the cultural differences here in China. But there's all aspects, including guanxi, you mentioned specifically. And here, because we talk about that a lot in our previous season, right? Season 1, we talk about guanxi and talk about those important concepts. But when it really comes to not just understanding, but also adapting into this environment of using guanxi to make them, feel getting fit or be successful. So how much percentage they should really put into compromising themselves or adapting into it, or how much should they insist being themselves? For example, like say, if you be guanxi, you need drinking, right? So because this is a question that I was asked again and again by my friends around me. So I would like to have your insight.
Well, I think that we have at first to really give a broader idea of what guanxi is, and in order not to limit it to the specific business style of networking that also some Western people could perceive to be more kind of corruption. Let's try to get rid of this perception of guanxi and really focus on the fact that, to me, guanxi is the reflection of the fact that the Chinese culture, as much as I would say most culture in the world, with the exception of the most Western cultures, I would say that the majority of the world are relationship-oriented culture. Doesn't mean that in those cultures, relationships are important, while in the West they are not. What I mean is that in the West at large, but mostly maybe, like in Anglo-Saxon country, in Germany, in Switzerland, in the northern country, you can very well do business with someone even if you're not friends, even if you don't have a special personal relationship. People say business is business, friendship is friendship, right? And we are used to do that. We don't need to spend hours eating, drinking, developing a personal relationship. If you agree on what we do on business, that's fine. And then if we can also, after that, go have a beer and become friends, that's just like a potential consequences, but it's not a precondition to do business. And this is something that for people who are really used to this very transaction-oriented culture, it's very difficult to get used to the way of doing business in China. I had, especially the first part of my first experience in China as a business consultant, many clients who couldn't even find the time to come to China because they were too busy. So I was trying to make them understand that I was their advisor, that yes, I was able to build some relationship with potential partners, potential investors, but if they wanted to go further, they had to come and spend time with these people and build a personal relationship. And that was really something that these people had really some hard time to understand. And there were a few situations where clients who were actually briefed beforehand by myself on the fact that you don't come to China the first time and pretending to have something signed. You know what I mean, right? And actually they would come and be very upset because they couldn't get anything concrete. And this is really something that I've seen many times. But at the same time, I was also able to convince some clients of the importance of relationship building, and also the fact that you can come to China maybe for a week and not talk about business for a few days, right? And it is not actually a waste of time, but it's actually an investment in relationships. Yeah. Some of these people are doing quite well in China right now. But obviously it takes a few years. Also, there was a very interesting, I think it was when I was doing my research for the book, I came across research made by a big consulting firm, I think it was 4 years ago. And there was this data that made me think. It was like something about 48 or 49% of foreign companies who go to China leave after 2 years. But to me, the fact is that 2 years is what you need at least to start establishing a good foot on the Chinese market, So it doesn't make any sense. If you leave after 2 years, it means that you are not ready to make the effort to really commit to the Chinese market. And this is one really important part when it comes to relationships. But the other part is also related to people management in China, to dealing with your own employees or managers in China, if you are an international company, is developing relationships with your employees in a different way that you would do in the West.
Yeah. That naturally comes to my second point I was going to ask you. One of the important aspects you talk about in your book, the impact of hierarchy on leadership and management. It's so different, right? There is a vast difference between China and the West. Could you elaborate more on that?
Well, I can give you a very recent example, which is very interesting. I can actually give you two examples, since we are going to talk also about Chinese companies going global today. So I have an example of, obviously not giving any names of company, but Chinese company comes to Switzerland buying a local company and not making any kind of adaptation in terms of management, sending actually people directly from China, and by the way, people with no previous international experience, coming to Switzerland and using a very hierarchical leadership style. Well, the consequences was that everyone was very upset, and actually the business started going that well because people were not motivated to work in the same way they would do it before. The other example on the other way is actually very recent. A friend of mine who is working for a big company coming from Northern Europe, which, as you well know, they are very egalitarian, if you want, compared to the Chinese. They are much less hierarchical, and actually, they have tried to apply to all their subsidiaries around the world the same kind of flat leadership style that they use back home. And they have been trying to do the same thing in China, and it's a disaster because people don't meet, people don't understand who their boss is, they don't understand how the hierarchy works, and it's pardon my French, but it's a big mess. And definitely there is always, this is one of the big challenges for companies operating on a global level, because on the one hand you have the necessity to follow a global strategy, but at the same time you have to be able to at least adapt part of your strategy to fit the local requirements. Definitely it's not something that you do overnight. It takes resources in terms of training, in terms of investing in your own people, and you will see the result, but it takes time. If you go there for the quick fix, it's not going to work, because the first thing we know, it's almost ridiculous to say it's important to invest in your people. Everyone says that. But what motivates people, exactly because of cultural differences, it might not be the same if you are a Shanghainese or someone or a Swedish living in Stockholm. And you have to take this into serious consideration. And those companies who don't do that, well, then they will face many issues along the way.
Do you suggest that one of the solutions is to adapt the culture locally more than, being him or herself? Because this is something critical when it comes to having meetings with Chinese people, executives, or even the officials. So if you can give example, how would the Westerners and the people from your region could actually, just get over this cognitive dissonance sometimes, and to be really effective in communicating, even when it comes to, building the rapport and the relationship in this, overcome these hierarchy issues?
Well, but I think that one very important thing that we have to say when we talk about cross-cultural communication and cultural intelligence is that you don't have to forsake your own culture. It would be the worst mistake. You have to be who you are. You bring your own perspective. But what cultural intelligence means is that you're also able to understand the perspective of the one you're talking with. And as long as you are going to China, obviously it will be ideal that both sides make an effort to adapt to the other, but it happens rarely. So at least it's up to you to try to understand the cultural codes and the cultural values of the other culture, and try to adapt your style to the local style. And actually, based on many research that have been made on this matter of communication, it's easier for someone coming from an egalitarian kind of culture to become a little bit more hierarchical than the other way around, right? And but then you also have to be very careful, because I've seen situations where, like, this was very interesting. Another example, a few years ago, again, it was a manager coming from the Netherlands. He had just been appointed as a general manager of a big company in Shanghai. And so very humble guy, coming from a culture that doesn't value the status of power, by having a big office, the big car, etc., which, as we know, are quite different, perceived quite differently in China. So the first thing that he did, thinking that it would be the cool thing to do in order to build his own reputation among his employees, was to give up his big office and the big car, because he was biking to the office, and well, that didn't work out. After a few weeks, he realized that actually he couldn't feel any kind of real commitment from his closest employee, and eventually the Chinese person who was in charge of human resources had it was a responsibility actually to tell him that the problem was that he was not credible because he didn't have like the status of the boss. So he wasn't, being taken seriously. And in a matter of few days, he got back to big office and a big car, and already the dynamics started to change. Sometimes there are small things that you have to keep in place if they are not part of your culture. But if you understand that this is important, especially at the beginning of your experience, to build your credibility, then with time and the proper training and internal communication, you can also actually make your employees understand that there are maybe other ways to work together. But it's really important to understand that some things that for us maybe don't even make any sense anymore, they're very important in other cultures. And so you have to take them into account. And hierarchy is still very important in China. And if you don't take this into consideration, you will have many problems. And also, if you give me another few additional seconds on this answer, there is also sometimes a misconception in the West that being hierarchical means being some kind of a dictator, that can decide anything that he wants. And actually, it's completely wrong, because also based on the Confucian idea of a hierarchy is based on a relationship of reciprocity, like the one of the father with the son. So the son gives loyalty and obedience to the father, but in exchange, the father take care of the children. And the same, the business leader has to do with his employees. So you have really, again, it connects the dimension of hierarchy with the connection, with the dimension of relationships that we touched upon before. So it's really important to understand all the dynamics if you want to try to adapt your strategies to the Chinese market.
Those are great insights. Well, the importance of developing this kind of cultural intelligence we talk about goes both ways, right? And it's not up to the Chinese company with this global ambition everywhere we described in the media, and to develop skills and capabilities in terms of this cross-cultural competency or communication in order to be successful. But so here, can you give us a few examples on this key misunderstanding when it comes to this, for the Chinese people going global, how they can present themselves? Because right now, you see, because of the communication differences, because of the cultural differences, and there's a lot of things need really to be explained. And for Chinese company, they go global, they need to have a proper good communication strategy. So if you have a few tips for that, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, for a few tips, I don't know. There's certainly a very complex situation, because what you said is correct. There is definitely, from the outset, a difference in the way we communicate. We know the Chinese are less direct than the Americans, for example, in terms of interpersonal communication or business communication, but also in the way you develop strategic communication is the way you decide which stakeholders you have to communicate in order for your company to be successful. And I think that beside the different way of communicating is really the strategic part that sometimes is missing, because for many Chinese companies that are at their first international experience, they don't understand that what will have an impact on their business in global markets is not necessarily only related to the specific business at hand. All the matters related to reputation are becoming increasingly crucial, and reputation can be affected by external stakeholders, which are very important in the West, and let's put it in let's say that are less important on the Chinese market. And I'm talking especially about public opinion, the media, NGOs. If you're not dealing strategically and engaging with these stakeholders in the West, you will have many problems. And this is something that many Chinese companies, but because they are not used to do that, because for many companies, the main stakeholder is the government, or the shareholders or their customers, if you want, the direct stakeholders. But the external stakeholders are as much as important as the internal ones. And this is where the many Chinese companies are still on the learning curve. Then what is interesting to see is that they learn quite fast from their mistakes, but it would be maybe smarter to be a little bit proactive, And but another things that you can see, and we have seen it recently with some high-profile cases, and it is also somehow related to what we said before about hierarchy, because also hierarchy has obviously an impact on the organization, is that today, if you are, let's say, under attack on the media, you must respond right away and with the proper message. Okay, especially in some countries. Also, that we could also be more sophisticated and say that obviously doing business in the United States and dealing with the U.S. media is not the same as you would do it in France, which is totally true. But generally speaking, in the West, you have to be able to deal with the media and tell your story. Because if you don't tell your story, other people will do it for you. So it's not necessarily today in this, I'm not saying it is good or bad, that's how it is. Today it is not the one who has, like, let's say, the best arguments who wins, is the one who is able to shape the narrative. And today the problems that many companies have is that there is already, if you want, on a larger macro level, a new geopolitical competition between, let's say, the US and China, which has an impact on Chinese companies coming to the West. And so in order to try to compensate from this country of origin effect, if you want, they really need to go the extra mile to build a reputation. And also the fact, realizing that it's not what you say that matters, but it's how other people perceive it. So you can tell your story, but if people don't understand in the way you would like them to understand, well, it's not going to work. And certainly today, and think about, especially in the United States, but not just in the United States, in Europe as well, if there is a controversy surrounding a company, if this company doesn't speak, well, the general reaction, and whether this is true or not, is that they're hiding something, right? So, and this is how it is. So you really have to build a more sophisticated way of communicating. But sometimes the fact is that these companies have very smart communicators, but in order to be able to respond, they have to wait for the hierarchy, to give them the green light to respond and to how to respond. And sometimes it's too late.
Right. So you touched them two very important points. And one here is communication. Really, it's a two-way process. And a lot of time we want, for companies here in China, from my point of view, a lot of us just care about sending the message, creating the message, right? We are not focused enough on how much of this message are well received. Especially, we have to consider about how this audience got brought up and educated and influenced in their system, in their environment, in their culture to understand a message like this. So I think that's very, very important. And we have to go deeper to ask why. As you just mentioned, the very important concept hierarchy here. So play a role. So a lot of times, a lot of situations like this, we do not go that deep. We thought that's our boss job. That's the job.
Absolutely.
Decision makers. And the second point is also excellent because I remembered when I was at a big conference, a PR conference, I believe, international PR conference, one of the director of the press from one big company here delivered speech, and he pointed out in 9 Chinese words here is like 不敢说.
Yeah.
愿说不会说. You remember that? I think you were at the conference.
Yeah.
And I really touched me. Oh my gosh, 9 words illustrate everything when it comes to whether or not Chinese company can tell the narratives, right? So, and from your point of view, what make this happen, and how could corporations in China deal with this and, improve upon it?
Well, I definitely one very important point that you just made is the fact that both in terms of corporate communication and also in terms of public diplomacy from the Chinese government, if you think about the billions of dollars that China has been spending in the last 2 years to build soft power capabilities, and you see the results are not very encouraging in terms of the reputation that China has in the world, actually reflects the fact that most of these campaigns, if you want, were done through a broadcast mode. Just we tell you who we are, not going to, but without even really engaging with the public, but most importantly, understanding who actually is the public. Because if you spend billions of dollars to make a beautiful documentaries about China who are seen by Chinese people living abroad, well, it doesn't have the impact that you're trying to achieve. And I remember actually that it was a little bit over a year ago. I was invited in Brussels to a very interesting Euro-China conference with expert from both sides, and there were very interesting people working, like from China Radio International, China Global Network TV, and what was interesting to see is that they were actually saying all the good things that they're doing, but there was no real consideration about in-depth analysis of what the audience of this campaign would be. And of the fact that communication is not about putting out a message and let's wait how it goes, but it's really about engaging. So again, remember that China is a 1,000 years old civilization, but in terms of this aspect related to global business, is still a very new country, if you want, in terms of experience. So they definitely need to learn, and I think that what they can do, and the biggest companies, they have learned from their mistake they're doing, they're paying big PR companies and so on. But I think for me, based also on recent experiences, it's really important that there should be a very sophisticated training for people that companies or the government decide these are the people that we want to go out in the world and communicate for us. To me, I was recently very impressed, and the fact that I was impressed, it means that it's some kind of still an exception. I was invited to speak at a business forum in Oman on how to leverage on Chinese investments in that area. And it was an audience of top CEOs of the top companies of the countries. And there were a few representatives of the Chinese commercial section of the local embassy and of Chinese companies operating there. And there was especially a lady who was amazing. It wasn't just that her English was almost perfect, but the way she was engaging with the people, she was telling the China story. Just by the way, you would be more convinced to listen to her. And because she was engaging, she was brilliant, she wasn't following the script. Too many times you meet and I participated to many events, especially in terms of building bridges between Europe and China, with people coming from business, academia, think tanks, diplomacy, and many times you have these very smart people just reading a script. And it doesn't work anymore. We still have many Europeans who do that, but they're considered boring, So it's and when you find the one who is able actually to understand the kind of communication that has an impact on us, then you will be able to at least try to make your point and make people understand the other side of the story. Exactly. Because this is what's really important. People are very lazy, and if they hear only one side of the story, but it's like made in a very efficient, pragmatic, and catchy way, well, the other one will not be interesting enough. But if the other ones will learn on how to be more catchy and interesting to listen to, maybe it would be easier to help shaping the narrative into a different direction towards a better understanding.
Good communicators are good leaders. I believe so, and I believe you believe too, right? And those are the people with huge and with great executive presence. When they speak, they care about how they can send this message to the bottom, the heart of the audience, I think. And I think as more Chinese people embrace globalization, they go global, engage with people like you, and I would say people start to learn more and more about it, right? But it takes some strategies. It takes, for corporations, it takes strategy to cultivate this kind of talent. So when it comes to cultivate this talent, I remember you have a very good concept called corporate diplomacy. So how actually does it work? Or how companies step by step to make use of it?
Well, if you want, corporate diplomacy is a combination of elements. It's really today in a very uncertain and complex world, a company working on a global level needs to take into consideration many aspects that can affect their business. And if you want, all these aspects are not necessarily business related, but it could be political, it could be regulations, it could be social, it could be geopolitical, it could be even environmental. There are so many factors that can have an impact on the business of a company. And in order to navigate this very complex environment, you need to have a corporate version of what countries have. Their diplomats are representing the interest of these companies in different countries. They should be able to communicate with different stakeholders by adapting their style to the audience. You can have great diplomat representing countries around the world. Today, companies, especially big ones, need to have the same kind of functions, but definitely it's not something that you reach after a few days of training. Mm-hmm. So what you said about cultivating talent, that's the word, cultivating. At least that you should start but from university on, building curricula and process where people who are really maybe more naturally oriented to be working at an international level, because this is also something that big multinational do when they do their assessment. Based on their assessment, they can understand whether you are or not potentially able to thrive in an international context with all the challenges that comes with, or not. It's also sometimes it's a matter of character. And then you add technical skills. But maybe me and you are we're here talking because from the beginning we were somehow wired to be more at ease with people from other cultures that some of our friends would be, So, but the fact, for example, I remember that we met at this conference of the China International PR Association in Beijing when I gave this speech on corporate diplomacy, and now I could see there how much interest there was among these people working in communication for big Chinese companies, that actually communication, it's not that communication is part of corporate diplomacy. To some extent, corporate diplomacy is the new frontier of communication, right? And it's really combining different skills. And what is interesting is that actually, we'll see you in Beijing soon, because I will give a course on corporate diplomacy at a university there. Wonderful. And the fact that they are organizing this, it reflects exactly this growing awareness of the fact that you need to cultivate talent from university to build the new elite, because you will need people who are able to thrive and work in an international environment. And I think that definitely it would be a great thing to start investing on these people when they are still young and they are very fresh and more able to learn new ways of doing things. Because if there is one thing that I always see when I'm in China, and especially dealing with the youngest generation, is the level of curiosity that they have. They want to know, they want to learn, and so I think this is already a very good thing. It's a good start, and then you will have to be able to fit that curiosity. And this is what I think Chinese academia, Chinese companies should do more and more in order to get a new generation to be more international in their way of communicating, of living, and interacting with other people.
There are actual interests and there are actual actions to be taken in this cultivation for the future global talents. And I personally see a lot, not just in university level, but in corporate level too, and a lot of local institutions, local organizations who, even the NGOs, they are trying to really, they're very interested in these kind of topics like cultural intelligence. How could we have more prepare our talents for the future global challenges, right?
Do you see, sorry, I know it's me asking you a question because I'm also very interested to learn from you, as usual. Do you see a big difference now with the new generation being more curious? So do you see things changing because of this new generation coming up?
Certainly. I was constantly asked by, let's say, there's International Volunteer Association, and there's millennial groups called Porous Youth, and with hundreds of thousands young millennials online. They are really like craving for new content when it comes to, or new directions when it comes to how to build new leadership skills. So I see the new millennials, this generation, millennial, I'm a millennial actually. I study about our group. We are 400 million people in China, 5 times bigger than the size in the US. We grew up embracing Western culture and international culture. We go everywhere, right? So for the last 10 years, and I was able to go to different countries, and many of my peers went outside of China. They're in Africa, Europe, China, Brazil, a lot of different countries. And they start to become the hub or the connectors or the local lighthouse even for the Chinese millennials, young people from college, from high school, college, and even some corporate professionals who tired of their work kind of want to go global to take do some work outside. There's so much interesting organizations are organizing these international trips. These trips are more for studying and touring and visiting those interesting historical and business corporations, historical sites. There's a lot of movement like this. Almost every single day I heard from my peers are very active. So, and
it's encouraging.
Yeah, we are the generation. Think about this. I always compare my parents' generation with the parents of the generation from the US, let's say, right? Their parents from the 60s actually grew up study and working and enjoying music, concert, and traveling abroad. But our parents, like my parents, growing up trying to, get rid of hunger, right? So
very interesting point. Yeah, absolutely, yes.
I mean, I grew up with abundance. I grew up with the society digitalized and with abundant resources. Our confidence is strong when it comes to what we can do. So we're not like previous generation. We might, in some way, limited by our mindset because of the historical marks in the brain, right? So that the lack, the scarcity, the food and shelter, the safety, for money and for getting rich or something. And I think this generation, this generation could be liberated in some way so they could think of going global and doing more and be more globally impactful and do some social impact thing, is because, and we are living a different age, and we see the country grow, out of, this China has last 4 decades changed, different generations' life. So I think it's very worth noticing this generation are trying to do something different. But it also have some challenges when it face to where is the future. The young generation have to keep asking themselves, what is the meaning, what is the purpose of life, these things like that.
We also see, I think we obviously with different context perspectives, but we see very similar phenomena. And what I find very interesting, we see also this new generation, which is more value driven, more progressive, more global oriented, that is becoming more vocal in the West. But I wonder sometimes about how much they're really representing their generation. In terms of fighting this new scary rise of nationalism and racism, it's not at all young people, because sometimes we since we are lucky enough to be surrounded by like-minded people who have the same kind of open mind and progressive view, we tend to think that everyone is like that, which is not true. And I guess in China it's the same. So let's hope anyway that they will strong enough to be able to make their own older people or fellow millennials become like more globally minded, because honestly today we see unfortunately a different tendency. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And their cross-cultural communication does not only happen between the East and West, they should also happen between different generations. That's I always say.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yes.
And this is one question from Brandon. He asked, what is a common assumption about China that you think is most likely to change in the near future? And how fast do you think that might happen?
Wow. Well, I think while you were asking me the question, I thought, oh my God, what I'm going to say. Now, I think that definitely one that I see changing already because of the fact that also very simply European Western customers can have these products in their hand is the end of copycat China. Is the old assumption that China is just able to copy and not to innovate is dissipating faster than other assumptions and cliché, because actually people don't need to travel to China to see how much it has changed, because this is something that I always see. People change their assumptions about China after going to China. And usually they come back with a much better opinion about the country, right? But if you expect everyone to go to China before changing their assumption, well, it will take a long time. I think that definitely, and I see it also in when I do my keynote speeches around Europe, talking with people. Definitely, the fact that now you have access to this kind of Chinese technology, this old assumption is dissipating quite fast, at least among the new generation, right? And so definitely this is one point.
So another question related to this is, which one would you most like to see change at this moment, and why? So you deal with China a lot in many aspects. I was wondering, is there anything you'd like to see made here in China?
Well, this is very difficult. This is a tricky question. No, it would take us 3 days of podcast to try to figure this question out. If I look at also the recent days, that there's been quite a few critical moments with the visit of President Xi to Europe. You can see there that there is a new dynamics of tension, of misunderstanding from both sides. Sometimes Sometimes the fears coming from the West about China, they're justified. Sometimes they're just a reflection of old assumption, as we said. But I think that from the Chinese side, which I respect a lot, as you know very well, there should be maybe more effort to, going back to what we said at the beginning, to understand how they can be perceived. You know, there was recently a very, and it may be just an isolated accident, but there was when your president was visiting Italy, a young lady who is a journalist from an Italian newspaper was harassed by a spokesperson of the local Chinese embassy because she's critical about China. Well, this kind of thing shouldn't happen anymore today. So if you're working for an embassy in a European country, you should understand how that European country works and the fact that you respect the media, you don't harass them. This is just an accident. So I think that it takes a higher level of sophistication on how to deal with different countries. It goes beyond cultural intelligence. It's really understanding that the same way we have to respect the fact that China is different, and we have to stop having this Western-centric mindset of the fact that becoming modern means becoming Westerner. No. The Chinese don't have to become more Westernized. They are more modern. They will live modernization in a Chinese way. There might be things that we don't like about China, and there are things that I don't like about China, but there are so many other things that I love about China. And so as a bridge builder, what I'm almost trying to do is to try to focus on those things that we can share. And the problem is that today on a political level of many sides, you try for like short-term political gains to focus on what divides us. But definitely from the Chinese side, knowing that some of the Chinese system can be problematic, let's put it the way, in the West, they should maybe make a better effort to tell their story and really also adapt, not just as the companies should do, but also in terms of diplomatic efforts to the different local sensibilities.
Really on spot and really insightful. I almost would not like to end this conversation with you, but
me neither.
We would love to have you back, in the future.
Well, it will be a pleasure. I don't think that the argument will be over. For conversation every day.
We'll include more and more bridge builders like you and like many other experts on our show. I think in a time of increasing this geopolitical competition, people with this cross-cultural skill like you have in both China and the West are important and critical, whether in business, academia, or diplomacy. I think it's very important.
I was really happy to be here today. Really looking forward to be there another time. This time with Brendan, who, as I heard, is sleeping now, I guess, because it's been
He will be here to summarize our show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and hope to see you soon in Beijing.
Well, I actually don't have too much to add. That was such a good talk. I really appreciate Diego giving us his time and Yinging for doing such a great job in my absence. As always, I'm looking forward to being back in China myself in just about 3 weeks to do more interviews in person with Yinging and some special events. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to visit HowChinaWorksPodcast.com to find resources on various shows. We're going to have some information from Diego up very soon. It's not up there at the moment that I record this, but very soon we'll include some links for him on that website. Thanks again for listening. On behalf of Yinging Li, I'm Brendan Davis, and we will see you next week on How China Works.